there was one day that I mentioned something to AJ. I was like, "Oh, that's just because I'm ADHD." And AJ goes, "I'm kind of uncomfortable with you saying you have ADHD." He's like, "I don't think you do anymore." I had been off the medication for a few years
Hmm.
at this point. And I started to think back and I'm like, "Oh, you're right."
Welcome to the Cross Counsel Podcast. We're here to offer helpful insights and inspiring testimonies to support you on your journey. We believe we have all been created in God's image, but the likeness of Christ has been damaged by sin and brokenness. Thankfully, we don't have to remain in this diminished state. It can be beautifully restored through the experiential love and truth of Jesus. You don't need to be a spiritual giant to receive ministry with us, just a willing and courageous heart. If our podcast or ministry has blessed you, we invite you to visit us at crosscounsel.com. Your support, whether through a special gift or as a monthly partner, helps sustain this work and keep the podcast going. Your generosity enables us to touch lives here in the States and across the globe. As we cooperate with God and lean on His power, we can all be a part of how our unique melt process provides immediate help and lasting hope. Together, we believe it's changing generations. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Cross Counsel Podcast. Again, we have AJ and Hillary on the podcast. Hey, guys.
Hi.
Hey.
One of the things that Hillary has on her heart is to talk about how when she was younger, she had an ADHD diagnosis and was medicated, all that stuff. And now she doesn't have any symptoms. So she just wanted to throw that idea out. But before we get into that, how are you guys doing?
It's been a long day.
It's been a day, huh?
Yeah, I mean it's beautiful out, right? And there's a lot of day left still. But it's just been long. We're moving my grandma to assisted living this weekend. So trying to get things kind of situated for her and help her to understand that she's gonna be safe there and um pick out pictures and things that she can take with her. And it's just hard. It's hard for her to process as it would be anybody to leave your home. But she has Parkinson's and dementia, and it's the best thing that's for her. Sucks that it's the best thing for her. But yeah, it's just been one of those days where you're just dealing with real life stuff. It's a lot. So
Yeah. Yeah, it is tough.
so it's hard. You guys have been through it already, and it's real life. At least this life, right?
Well,
Yeah.
and you've got both sides of the life, right? Because you got a little toddler. How's that guy doing?
He's doing good. He's
Yeah.
so fun. Like he's just like learning new things all the time, and he's learning how to talk a little bit more now. And he thinks he's putting sentences together, but it's still just a lot of, babbling, speaking in tongues, that kind of thing.
It's a lot more interesting than duh again
Yeah.
and again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, people say that about me too, so I'm trying to put sentences together myself. So.
True. Sometimes it's hard.
Mhm.
So yeah, no, he's fun. He has a great time. He loves when we go see great grandma because he gets to see a dog. And he loves dogs right now.
Yes.
So we took him to the torchlight parade last night. So it's like a big glow in the dark parade. And he thought that was pretty cool.
Until the truck blared their horn.
Yeah, then he was not happy about
All
that.
the way loud. Yeah, the semi truck. Yeah.
Mhm.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, that's fun when he sees a dog because he calls half the things in the world "da," so he's pretty
that's
close
true.
when he sees a dog.
Give him credit.
Yep.
Right. So
Mhm.
just show him off when he's near a dog. Wow, that kid
Yeah.
is so smart. Well,
Yep.
yeah.
What about you, Steve? How have you been?
How have I been? It's
Yeah.
amazing. Like on a podcast day. Yes, exactly. Like yours, how crazy it is. It's like trying to get everything else done and try to get this thing set up. So, you discover new things. You find out that, wow, that light that I got at Goodwill is more durable than I thought because I was moving a table over and I knocked it right over and it's still going. So that $10 I spent on this pretty decent light, is paid for itself already.
Somebody probably spent a lot more on it before and you're just reaping the benefits.
I think so.
That's why I love thrifting.
That's a whole nother podcast, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
All right. Well, maybe some other time. Getting back to the topic, Hillary, why don't you walk us through what that was like for you, a little bit of your story. I know you've unfolded some of that for us already,
Yeah.
but as if somebody has never heard your story.
Yeah. So I was actually diagnosed with ADHD in 2010, 2011, somewhere in there.
Mhm.
And so the reason I was diagnosed at that time is because I was in college and I was struggling with my schoolwork. I was on the like warning list for suspension. They were basically like, get your act together or we're going to suspend you from the
Mm.
school. So it was a pretty serious place to be. And a friend of mine at the time was taking a psychology class and he said, Hillary, if you don't have ADHD, nobody has ADHD. So it was just one of those moments where I kind of started looking into it and thought, oh, maybe this is me. And I got tested and they're like, oh, yeah, you have it. This is definitely,
Mm.
let's medicate you. I got on medication. And it was funny, actually. When I got diagnosed with it, I had talked to my mom and I said, Mom, I'm getting this diagnosis and they're saying that I do have ADHD. And she was like, oh, yeah. She's like, you have it. I'm like, what? Did nobody tell me that I have ADHD except for this one person who happened to be studying it? And my mom's like, no, I just didn't think you were struggling with schoolwork. But I was struggling socially because of the ADHD. I was just very impulsive and would talk without like thinking and would say things that would annoy people. And I feel like a lot of my friendships were just like a love-hate where I was really bubbly and exciting to be around, but then I was annoying at the same time. And all of that just was part of this ADHD that I had. So I got diagnosed. And the next semester at UWL, where I was doing school, I was on the dean's list. So I had this incredible change due to the medication
Mhm.
of going from almost being suspended to being on the dean's list. Like it legitimately worked for me.
Mhm.
And I would go through periods of my life after that, going on and off medication and having this love-hate relationship with it because the medication would cause me to feel depressed when I would come off of it. And this is something that my doctors never told me. I actually found this out later on, that when I would come off of the medication, I would start to have these down effects and I would start to feel really depressed and really anxious and really panicky. And AJ experienced, that aspect of it. And we didn't really start realizing it was the medication until we were married for like a year or something like that.
Yeah, give or take,
But whenever I would go off the medication,
which was every week.
which was every week,
You
but
would take
also
it Monday
like,
through Thursday, and then you would come off of it Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
right, I would sleep all day long. It was awful. But there was also periods of my life where I would go off the medication for extended periods of time, like months at a time, because I was sick of taking it.
Mhm.
And always during those times, I'd have issues at work. I'd have problems with my boss or with the coworkers or whatever else. And so there was just this deeply seated fear in me, like it was a fear of being who I truly am. On the other side of it, there was comfort for me in the diagnosis of ADHD because it explained away my failures. It explained away my weaknesses. And so I think probably when I started to be a part of your family, and even when I first started dating you, constantly I would like apologize for myself. Of like, oh, that's just ADHD. Oh, this is just how people with ADHD are. And I just felt like I constantly had to just put that out there. I have ADHD. Please don't hate me for who I really am. Like that's truly how I felt. And I was so scared for people to, yeah, it was a really, it like looking back on it, it was just painful to constantly feel like I can't be who I really am because people won't love me or accept me for that. And over the course, it's interesting because doing theophostic prayer, and doing cross counsel, maybe we had like one session that kind of related to ADHD, but I don't remember ever doing a session that was like, this is my session about ADHD. But over the course of time, as we continued to do sessions, there was one day that I mentioned something to AJ. I was like, oh, that's just because I'm ADHD. And AJ goes, I'm kind of uncomfortable with you saying you have ADHD. He's like, I don't think you do anymore. I'd been off the medication for a few years at this point. And I started to think back and I'm like, oh, you're right. I've been unmedicated. I've been doing a job that I love very, very well without any issues. I am not afraid of social situations anymore. And I'm all these like with ADHD, it feels like this all the time, like where things are just bouncing around in your head. And that had just calmed down. And suddenly it was like, I looked at you and I'm like, you're right. I actually don't have any of the symptoms of ADHD anymore. And I think that cross counsel had a lot to do with that. I also think that dietary changes had something to do with it. I think there's always like a mixture of things, but I would say like probably I think personally it was 90% cross counsel because it was this slow fade away from ADHD the more sessions that I had. And then 10% of the other little things like changing my diet and not having a high carb, high sugar diet, like that kind of stuff, having more protein. So that's
yeah, that's great. So just
yeah.
to break that down, and AJ, you can jump in on this too, but just what we're about is having God put the pieces back in the proper place.
Yeah.
That's what this universe is about. It's a broken universe. And the Logos is in part about bringing order to chaos.
The thing that I think about ADHD is that ADHD is habitual threat detection. People who have ADHD, I think, and this is anecdotally true for you, are likely to have had chaotic childhoods and the what's that, what that, there, this, that. For Hillary, it's like, what's the next thing that's going to make my parents upset? Like, is it that I left the cabinets open? Is it that dad's set the football game? Is it that the dishes aren't done? Is it that da, 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 da? And so you're constantly like, where is the thing that's going to cause me the emotional pain? And I need to find out where it is and know where it's coming from. And so I think relief for you and your symptoms of that would be described as ADHD was that the necessity to be on threat detection mode 24/7 was removed the more that you had truth developed into the lie-based beliefs that you'd picked up from your childhood. You're not like, is this going to make AJ mad? Is this going to make AJ mad? Is this going to make AJ mad? Is this going to be like, am I going to irritate somebody with that? Like that all started to fade as you gained confidence dwelling in the truth and less reliance upon lie-based thinking. There was no longer the need to be so scattered and look for the thing that's going to like cause the next emotional snap. That's what I would say.
We become hyper vigilant when you at least have interpreted the world that way.
Right.
Because we are always in this mode of self-protection, whether we know it or not. We're always in this mode to some degree or another. I do not want to be isolated. Alone is different, but I do not want to be isolated. We are constantly looking for connection. We're constantly looking for meaning. We're constantly looking for things that make sense, that bring us peace, whether it's genuine peace or a solution to our pain that keeps us from feeling the bad stuff. And so that comes back to the Logos. I think I said this on a podcast not too long ago, but I heard the definition that God is eternal reality. And we're not always at threat. There are times where we are at threat. And when we are genuinely at threat, we need to respond to that appropriately. But when we get into these habits, this programming that's you're not safe, because that can even happen on the playground. Oh, they're going to look at me, right? If you want to share any more about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that just happened to me several times where I just, because I was just you guys know me, not all the podcast listeners do, but I am one of the most talkative people you'll ever meet. I love to talk and I love to have conversations. And I think sometimes in my love for like verbal processing, I can say and do things that frustrate people or maybe annoy people. And so, yeah, I had moments on the playground where, people would make fun of me or people didn't like me and that really bothered me. Or when I got to be in high school, somebody who was my friend one week isn't my friend the next week and I have no idea why. And then all of a sudden it's because I said something, you know what I mean? And part of honestly, like, what is that? Like, that's just learning to grow up and mature and pause before you speak and think about how your words are going to affect other people. That's not like I had some dysfunction in my head, but I was so afraid of that happening again that I'm constantly in this, okay, how do I protect myself? How do I protect myself? How do I protect myself? And I remember being in high school, like longing to have something wrong with me. Like I wanted so badly for something to be wrong with me to explain away all the things that were mistakes that I made or failures that I had or reasons why people didn't like me. I wanted there to be a reason for it because I was so hurt and sad by all the friendships that I lost and the people that I would upset and things like that.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, and it's just fascinating to me how when people step into the ministry, some people go to the very core place where they first learn that. That's not always the case. Sometimes there is this idea that the mind really needs to trust the process
Mhm.
because what we do is counterintuitive. I would much rather just tell somebody, oh, or hear from somebody, oh, you're fine, right? Don't we want to hear we're fine? And we
Yeah.
already lie to ourselves enough, right? That's one of the things that there's a woman named Tracy Goodwin, and she has a podcast that's the psychology of the voice, and she talks about the subconscious in a way that we also do. And so we tend to tell ourselves that we've got things figured out, or we believe at some level that we're okay in places where we're not as okay. But then we later find out that there's much more going on beneath the surface. It's like what you said, Hillary. You used a phrase, well, it worked for me. Well, yeah, in college, it worked for you, meaning, well, you know what? I don't even want to put words in your mouth. Just drill down a little bit more. What do you mean worked for you?
Well, the medication helped me focus and
Mm-hmm.
it drowned out all the other noise in my head,
Right.
is what happened. But then when I went to cross counsel and Jesus came in and he like healed different areas of my heart and my life, that noise drowned out
Mm-hmm.
all like by itself. And I
Right.
didn't need medication anymore. So it's a fix.
It's
Like
yeah,
it's putting a band-aid on a wound. It's not actually like healing the wound.
right. So yeah, I just want to be precise with that. It worked for you. It served a temporary function that
Yeah,
helped you get a degree, right?
absolutely.
So not criticizing that at all, but also then to have that awareness for people who are struggling with this, it doesn't solve the actual process. So
Mhm.
what needs to happen is those things being put back in the proper place. And we believe that the creator of the universe is the only one who can truly do that. So that unresolved emotional pain, those lies that we've consciously or subconsciously accepted as truth, and even the amount of buried unforgiveness that we have in our lives, it just, these things sometimes quietly, sometimes not so quietly, affect how we
Mhm.
live, how we interact, how we deal with the challenges of life. And it's easy to tell ourselves that we've moved on or that there's a past event that doesn't affect us anymore because we've learned to squash it down. But unless
Yeah.
we've done the hard work of digging in deep and confronting these things, they remain lodged in our subconscious. And 90 some percent of our thinking is subconscious. And yet we pay very little attention to that, especially in the church.
Yeah. And one of the things that I want to talk about too, because I feel like there's gonna be people listening to this right now who are upset about how we're talking about like a disorder like ADHD. Um, because, and I felt that
Mhm.
when there would be people who would pray for me that the Lord would heal my ADHD, and I'd get mad. I'd be like, no, I like my ADHD. That's who I am. You don't need to change me. Like,
Mhm.
and I think that might be kind of what some people are maybe maybe reacting to this. There's this anger because like this is a safe thing. Like I said, this I finally got that longing of my heart that there's something wrong with me because it felt like, okay, now there's something that explains away all the stuff. And I was able to find my identity in that and I felt like I had peace in that because I had an excuse. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so like I had to look at my own heart in that matter because for the longest time, like we'd even sit around the kitchen table and you'd make mention of, that like there's healing that could happen with the ADHD. And I was like, no, no, this is just who I am. Stop
Mhm.
trying to change who I am. But that's not who Jesus says I am. Like he's
Mhm.
not like you're the ADHD kid. Like there's there's more that he has for us, and we don't have to hide behind a disorder that we
Mhm.
have or like a diagnosis.
Right. And then you could still have the same energy and same interaction and
Yeah.
same ability to use words well, but without the fear, the drive that comes from those lies that we believe. I've had people that, for example, are fairly good at math or accountants, and so they've been driven to make sure that they get things right, and they become very good accountants because they have to have all the numbers match up. Everything has to add up correctly. But
Yeah.
but a big part of that drive came from I have to be perfect, which is driven by fear. Well,
Hmm.
yeah, confront the things that you need to confront in your life, get healing from Jesus, have those lies dispersed, and
Yeah.
then those places filled with God's truth. Guess what? Most people can still make the numbers match then as they do their job, like
Hmm.
as an accountant.
Yeah. There's still, I think that you become afraid that if I don't have this drive, I'll lose this gifting. But like the Lord's put that gifting in you, and He made me talkative. And I think that there's still some people maybe think I talk too much, but there's a lot of people who love me that like to listen to me talk, and I'm able to help people and teach people, and that same, because of that too. So that's something that the Lord put in me, and I don't have to despise it, even though it's gotten me into trouble before. And so it's the same thing with the accountants. You're good at your job. You don't need the fear to be a part of it. And sometimes we cling to that fear because we think that that's what makes us something.
Yeah, I think it's good too to talk about how we encourage people at Cross Council to go out and test those things. Okay, in the past, you've been afraid to do this, you've been afraid to do that, or you've noticed this. And I think there's this idea that's not unlike maybe being a jet pilot about or a rocket scientist, or it could just be a housewife, whatever, but testing parameters and tolerances. Like, how much can you endure keeping your mouth shut? How much can you endure being in a situation where people might look at you side-eyed, and just and not just run away from those things, but to see. And we talk about this quite a lot in our sessions. It's I have this double scale of 0 to 10. Like, what's the situation? Okay, let's try to be honest with ourselves. That situation, as far as a possible triggering event and truth-based challenges or pain in that, maybe that's a 4, but in the past, boy, my reaction has been an 8 or a 9.
Hmm.
Okay, I'm not going to run away from the 4 anymore. I'm not going to run away from the 7. I'm not going to run away from whatever that thing is. I'm going to test and see how much healing has the Lord provided me through this. I'm not just going to stay in my little cocoon, in my little safe place, because I think there's a calling, especially, well, I think throughout Scripture, God is calling people out. I don't know how many people He calls to hide in the cave for your whole life. Maybe for a little
Hmm.
while, you have to hide in a cave, right? Is that Elijah? But that's not,
Well, he
that's,
was relieved of duty immediately
yeah.
following that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
So maybe not so awesome there, but just the idea of testing those parameters by intentionally stepping into situations where we might feel uncomfortable. I think one of the podcasts that we did a few months ago was like, what do I do in between sessions? And one of the things that we talked about is take a look at those things in your life that you have coming up that you can't avoid, whether it's a family reunion, whether it's a job review, whether it's whatever thing that's going to be on your plate, to be really honest with yourself, or I really know that I need to confront somebody. Lord, help me to get in a place where I can speak truth in love. And
Hmm.
so that, because they're moments, they're opportunities for growth. Because if we don't stretch ourselves, if we don't know what the Lord has already done and test those parameters and the tolerances that we have, it's not going to be a very fun life, to be honest, or a very important, we might not make the kind of difference that God calls us to make. So
Right.
to be able to challenge ourselves, how have you seen that played out in your lives?
I would say that I've made it practice to see if emotional instances hold their emotional hurt over time.
Mhm.
I can think of a particular instance where a coworker yelled at me at 2 jobs ago.
Mhm.
We don't need the details.
Sure.
I don't think that she was fair to yell at me. That's
Mhm.
the point,
Mhm.
is that she was yelling at me over something that I thought that I was in the right end, but mostly just let it slide. And man, made me angry.
Mhm.
And then I thought about it a couple days later, and I'm like, oh, that thing, that coworker, that makes me so angry.
Mhm.
But it hasn't been that long.
Mhm.
And so if I think about it now or 2, 3 months after it happened, I don't feel anything. It's like, yeah, that was wrong. It's sad that that person needed to lash out so hard in that one thing that I did. That was not that big of a deal. that's too bad for them, right? So I reassessed over time, and when it is the kind of memory that deserves the deep dive, the take it to Jesus, the take it to cross counsel, to go through the melt process, like it sticks. It doesn't fade after 2 months or whatever the timeline is.
I notice more than I test it, because I guess kind of do that, but I think it just happens naturally for me. Like there was so much stress in social anything for me, whether it was texting someone back and being like, well, I have to address all these things in a perfect way, otherwise they're going to be offended, or going to uh friend's house. Like we'd go and every single time we'd leave, I'd be like, do you think it was okay that I said this? Do you think it was okay? Do you think they were mad at me the way that, like, it was just this constant over analyzing of every social situation. And and I've just realized lately that I'm like, sometimes like my habit will pop up and I'll be like, did I do this or say this? And then I'm like, wait, uh, oh well. Like if they're upset about it, then they should tell me, but I don't think I actually did anything wrong. I think that
Right.
it's probably fine. Like there's this like stopping that old habit and just being like, oh, I don't care. Like not that I don't care about people anymore, but I don't know how else to describe it otherwise that I'm just like, oh well, like they know I love them, so I can just move on with my day. And still being intentional, obviously, with people. I don't know if I'm explaining that right, but that's
Yeah, I mean, there maybe never have total callousness about another
no, and that's what I'm
person.
trying to say is it's not
Right.
meant to be callous. It's more like it was little things. Like, did I say the right thing to this person so that they don't get mad at me? But now it's just like I was fine. That response was fine. Like,
Yeah, when what I said was true or what I did was appropriate, as best as I can tell, then your half of the exchange where you do or don't have an emotional reaction, like that's up to you, right? Like
yes.
today's Friday of Oktoberfest here in La Crosse. I've got coworkers who work for me that did not want to work a full shift today. It's too bad. It's the end of the month. It's the end of the financial quarter. We have stuff that we need to get done on time. It's too bad you don't get to go to your drinking holiday. Sorry, So it's not callous like, haha, so-and-so's mad at me. I don't care. That would be inappropriate. But like, yeah, well, so-and-so needs to be here. They need to work and they need to do their job. And I'm being reasonable. And I've explained myself. And I had a face-to-face conversation explaining why I chose to do what I did. And they're still upset. Okay.
Yeah.
The end.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And for those who are listening too, just it is amazing how things unfold. Even in a session, if somebody comes in and they're like, okay, maybe I do need to confront some of these things in my life. Maybe the Band-Aid is worn out and I'm just wanting to go beyond just tolerating whatever that thing is in my life, whatever that is. And so I recently had somebody who came in and we talk a little bit at the beginning. People go through an intro call, which is great. We have a website that I think is helpful. When we talk to somebody at the beginning of a session, what we often say is when we go into the melt process, the things that we've held for so long is usually rooted in places before we were even teenagers. We don't make that a hard and fast rule, but we've just seen it over and over and over again, how people usually need to go to those places, but we don't dismiss anything that's before then. I had somebody who was in their 40s and they started stepping into some emotional pain that shows up in their life presently. And they just went back to a place in their 30s. And we kind of looked at that, investigated a little bit. The feeling was very similar and the lie was there. But I just said, okay, as you feel that let's, what you feel in today's world, that's kind of a launch pad. And it's not uncommon to just go back a little bit because your mind might not trust the process yet. And so they focused in on that memory that was just from a few years ago. And then they went back just a few more years and it was just similar. The theme was very similar. And I think they were in their late 20s. And then they went to another memory that was like in their early 20s. And then they went back to like being 17 and we test things out, but it just seemed like it was not quite there yet. And then when they really focused in on that 17-year-old memory, they went back to being 11. And that's where, as far as they reported, that's really where it seemed to have started. And it's just really important for people to know that so many different things, but following the emotion is part of God's design. That's how we get to those core places, not just thinking, because that person could not have thought back to being 11. And it just in my mind, and I don't know if I would consider myself a Lord of the Rings nerd, but I like those movies. We used to watch them every year. And so, AJ, does that remind you of anything? Like I think we talked a little bit about, like, what is it called? The beacons of Gondor.
The beacons of Gondor. I don't know that they probably have a better name than that, but yeah, the beacons are like your childhood self calls for aid, just daisy chaining all the way back across your emotional landscape to the beginning. There's signal fires, right? The against the will of the current ruler of Gondor, specifically in the movie, this giant beacon tower is lit ablaze. It's the size of a small shack. It's full of wood, and it's such a large fire you can see it from across the mountain range. And then that guy who's
right, it's up on a tower, right? They put it way up on a tower.
Yeah, way up on a tower, and then the guy who's on a mountain 20 miles away, whose entire job is to look off in the distance to see if the fire started, sees that the fire started, and then starts his big tower of wood on fire. And then the guy that's 20 miles away from him does the same. And this cross mountain communication goes from one kingdom to the other, and what would be faster than anything else possible in the setting.
Right. And I can't remember in the books, because when the first movie came out, then I made sure I read everything.
Sure.
But it was just to see it how they do it in the movie. It's just like, oh my goodness, they don't have electricity, but just how quickly a warning signal can be sent miles across this landscape to say, I need help. And it just popped in my mind like that. Like, that's how our mind works. It's like, I can go here to go here to go here. And that's that warning signal and all the different connections. That person might not have been able to go directly there, and how that just unfolded. That's just the only way that I can describe it. Not to go away too much from what the idea of Lord of the Rings is, but it's all putting out the fires, right? That's not part of the movies, but it's just that correlation of this is what's really happening. And it just tells you in the present that the stuff way back here is important. And the more we get that resolved, the more that we can come to a place of peace and truth and whatever God has for us to bring us into more wholeness. So,
well, I think it's the Lord that's going and kind of lighting those beacons right along the way and showing us where we need to go. And this is why beating the Bible over your head doesn't work. Like, you can know every verse and know exactly what truth to give to what lie, but
if you haven't truly come into agreement with it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's part of the process that the Lord leads you through, is he's like, I'm going to light this beacon and this beacon and this beacon and this beacon, because here, this is where the lie is rooted. It's not in your adult mind where you're able to logically say. It's where you were a little girl or a little boy and you didn't have the logical capability to actually know that that's a lie. And so I'm going to fix that and I'm going to heal that, because that's where you found your identity, or that's where you found your sense of self. And I need to go back.
I would say technically it really is our choice. So I just want to make that clear. Like, from a technical melt process standpoint, the Lord nudges people, the Lord points people in the right direction, but he doesn't light the fire. Everything else is great, but it really is that we have to choose to go there. He knocks. It really is that concept of Revelation 3:20, behold, I stand at the door and I knock.
Yeah.
So once that fire
I should say he knows where the fires are.
Yeah, of course. Yes, for sure. I don't think the Lord ever knocks on a door where there's nobody behind it or there's nothing behind it. I don't think the Lord's like knocking on this door. Oh, there's nobody home. That's not even a thing, right? He points at things. He knocks on things that are precious and fragile and important for us to take a look at. Thanks for joining us on the Cross Counsel Podcast. Keep pursuing transformation with a courageous heart, open to what only He can do. There are many ways to get involved. Pray for us, consider supporting us, share these podcasts, and if you haven't already, take the step to jump in yourself. We'll see you next time.